Welcome, everybody. Welcome to my lecture on the contemporary Socrates. I will make my presentation bigger. I think that it's better for you, not for me, but because it's unreal not to see you. But I think it's better to you when you can see the whole presentation. So I go start now with a full screen, and I don't see just my, I do just see my screen. Well, about contemporary Socrates. Of course, Socrates is, now we cannot say Plato's invention, but he is a character in Plato's dialogues. I will focus on the early dialogues of Plato. Why? Because in the early dialogues, we see the Socrates who is really in a dialogue somewhere in Athens with someone or a small group of people. And in the later dialogues, in the so-called middle and later dialogues, Socrates is just the spokesman of Plato's theories and Plato's ideas. And in the early dialogues, we see Plato in a conversation with someone or with 2-3 people, and they are talking about an issue of one of those people. And he is in dialogue with one of those people. So I focus on the early Socrates, so to say. In the early dialogues, Socrates is questioning truth claims. And in the later dialogues, he is, he is marketing, so to say, marketing Plato's theories and ideas. I think the idea of the conceptual persona is interesting here. The idea comes from the contemporary philosophers, Gilles Deleuze and Deleuze Guattari. Actually, Guattari was a psychiatrist, but together they wrote several important philosophical books. And they had the idea of the conceptual persona. They said Socrates is Plato's conceptual persona. Of course, Socrates was an historical figure, we know that, from other sources. But as we know him as a philosopher, he is most of all Plato's conceptual persona. He is a character in Plato's dialogues. And as a character, Plato changed the historical Socrates. So what we are doing now, what I will do now, is transform this original Socrates in various other scapes, modern scapes from the 20th century. We start with the classical Socrates, then we go over to Nelson's Socrates in 1920, 1930s, then to Husserl, and then we skip to Levinas, we skip to Wittgenstein. At the end, hopefully, we will have the contemporary Socrates. In the middle of our attention this hour is this situation at the left of the screen. It's a bench in a park. There are a woman, a man, and they just encountering. The woman was on the bench. The man was walking around, and then he asked the woman, "May I join at the bench?" And she said, "Okay." And then they start to talk about this, about that, about the park, about the ducks, about the kids over there. And then one moment, the woman started to talk about herself. And that we are going to follow this conversation and changing the character, changing from the classical Socrates up to the contemporary Socrates. So let us try to imagine ourselves in this park, on this bench. And starting with imagining ourselves being Socrates. Oh, I'm too fast. Okay, yeah. Nancy tells a story. She tells, our oldest son, he is 15, has PDD-NOS. And my husband also has mild autism. This often leads to clashes between them. Then it can be violent. When my son is angry, he yells and sometimes scolds my husband. My husband thinks he can curse back and recently said motherfucker to my son. I think this is not possible. This is awful. And it makes me very sad, Nancy says. I spoke to my husband about this, but he thinks I should knock on our son's door because he starts calling names. Well, she asks, how do I break through this negative atmosphere? So we see Nancy, she tells experiences and asks a question. And we have the philosopher, Socrates. He intervenes in her story. He makes remarks, he asks questions. Important in this situation is that the situation is already there. The classical Socrates was walking around in Athens, and then he happened to meet some people, one person or a small group of persons, and then they were already talking. Before philosophizing, there was already the story, the talk, the statements, the words, they were already there. In this case too, Nancy tells something that impresses or bothers her. It bothers her heavily. Then Socrates, he takes up an attitude. He pretends not to know about responsibility. We take her a question. Go back. We case her back. How do I break through this negative atmosphere? And she talks about her husband not. She thinks her husband must be responsible for his relation with his son and his son's behavior and his own behavior. So Socrates asks about responsibility, but he says, I, Socrates, do not know anything about responsibility. And you know. Please learn me about it. Teach me. And then he asks Nancy what it is, responsibility, but in the dialogue, in the conversation, he remains skeptical. He's the not knower. He knows nothing, but he is sharp. He asks. He's curious. He wants to know. He doesn't know, but he wants to know. And Nancy is the one who knows. That's his attitude. So Nancy questions her definition of responsibility. We don't have the time to develop this this conversation in detail, but one question could be: is Nancy's husband irresponsible? And another very important question for Socrates is to ask: how does Nancy define that responsibility or irresponsibility? So, for instance, she could define responsibility as the obligation to ensure that something functions or runs smoothly, and the obligation to account for it. This is a definition from a vocabulary. And then Socrates could ask, when does something run smoothly, for instance? And so on. Again and again, there is a definition, there is a new definition, but in the definition there are new concepts. And Socrates asked about that concept. Just again and again, the discussion goes on, the research goes on. The finding definitions and discussing these definitions is going on. And at the end, there is nothing. At the end, it's 2 hours later, it's time to go. And then they must say to each other, okay, we don't have an answer. There is not a solution. Philosophically, it's called, there's an aporia. It's a dead end. We cannot go further. And then they say goodbye and go their ways. What is important in Socratic philosophy is that philosophy is philosophizing. Philosophy is doing philosophy. Philosophy is action. Philosophy is performance. It's performative. And this philosophizing is philosophizing together. It is a dialogical relationship. This relationship is basic for Socratic philosophy. So Socrates' aim is having Nancy question her truth claim. That's why he do this role playing from, oh, you the teacher, I'm the student, teach me about it. And that's why he wants Nancy have questioned her truth claim by herself. The third thing that is important is that all this situation, this event is embedded in a citizen's life. So, I said Socrates was walking around in Athens. It were all kinds of situations that you find in the city, and those situations are not philosophical per se. It's just when Socrates decides to interfere in things that are being said, that there enters some philosophy in the situation. And the fourth important point is that as to Socrates, there is no end, there is no conclusion, there is no answer. The philosophical investigation, the research process remains open. Socratic philosophy is about not being able to define valid definitions of general concepts. So, in short, Socrates, it's about encounters in public space. So it is not in psychotherapeutic rooms. It's not in business rooms. It's not in closed rooms, in private rooms, not in private situations. It's in public space, on the market, near the courtroom, etc. The subject of the conversation is a truth claim of one of the interlocutors, of one of the participants, a truth claim on a public issue. It's not a psychological issue. It's a public issue. At that time, for instance, justice. In the case of Nancy, it's the public issue is responsibility. Responsibility is not a private issue. It is, of course, a private issue, but as a private issue, it is also a public issue. Then the role-playing, this attitude that you know, I don't know anything, tell me. And then when the story is told, when the definitions are made, is it a valid concept? Is justice, as you use the concept of justice, or as you use the concept of responsibility, is that a valid concept? So exploring definitions is what happens in the conversation. And at the end, no conclusion. The aporia in defining concepts. So far, Socrates. In the 1920s, it's quite a lot of ages later, Socrates was rediscovered, was reinvented, we can say. As we see him as a character in philosophy, in philosophical dialogues, we see that Nelson created his own Socrates, and it was in the 1920s. Here also, with Nelson, philosophy is philosophizing. Philosophy is a dialogical relationship. I must say that this situation from some conversation one-to-one is not typical of Nelson's practice. Nelson practiced philosophy, practical philosophy, in groups. It is with children and with young adults. It was always in group situation, but for now he is talking with Nancy. We saw that with Socrates, the conversation was already happening, and then Socrates came in. With Nelson takes the initiative. Nelson asks Nancy what she wants to talk about and helps her to find the underlying philosophical principles in her statement about responsibility. Then Nancy gives an example from her experience. So she talks about my husband is irresponsible. She tells, do we have a question or do you have a statement? And she says, yes, my husband is irresponsible. Then Nelson asks her, tell me more about this statement of yours. What happened with your husband? And then she tells her story. We already know about her son and her husband. And then Nelson asks, is there a question? No, the question might be, what is irresponsible? What is responsibility? Or what is it to be irresponsible? Again, we cannot follow this conversation in detail, because in Nelson's case it can take days to find the answer at the end. So I focus on Nelson's aim, and Nelson's aim is first having the participants, in this case Nancy, so having Nancy investigate her statement. And what he is looking for, what he is aiming at, is that this is presupposition. Nelson's presupposition is that everyday statements have an underlying philosophical principle. In this case, the underlying philosophical principle to be found could be, for instance, Kant's categorical imperative. Act only according to that maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. We all know this. So this is a general, universal philosophical principle, and in Nelson's philosophical practice, he is aiming at finding this philosophical principle in this everyday statement and experience of Nancy's. So you can say the the balance differs. The balance differs from Socrates. By Socrates, the balance is at with Nancy, and here the balance is with Nelson. Nelson has his aims. He knows that at the end we find one or more philosophical principles. Socrates knows at the end we know nothing. Maybe we see nothing. We have more insight in the situation, in the problem, in the issue, but we know nothing. But Nelson knows that at the end we know one or more philosophical principles, and that is his that's his road, his way he goes. I must say again, I must say that Nelson has a didactical and a pedagogical attitude and aim, that is, not I am the one who must discover this principle, I know them already. No, the pupil, the Nancy, the student must find it herself by means of her thinking and by means of her experiences. So didactically seen, the balance is at the side of Nancy. That's why the process in a Nelson's practice can take much time, many days even. Another point important with Nelson is that is like with Socrates, it is embedded in society. His aim is social political education. He was much engaged in society. It was in Germany in the 1920s, 1930s. He was much engaged, and he thought we need education, and we should start with the children and with the young adults. So this was his underlying social political aim. So with Nelson, it's all about philosophical principles at the end. So in short, Nelson Socrates, educating children and young adults. By the way, he said, was a criticism of Plato's dialogues. He said, written dialogues have no use. We cannot teach philosophy by have the children read written dialogues. They must experience, they must perform the dialogue themselves, and they must experience the dialogue themselves to make progress, to develop mentally, to develop philosophically. His attitude as a teacher was non-directive. So I said as a teacher, he thought the student must do the process himself or herself to learn philosophy. The subject of the conversation is a statement of one of the participants, and he links the statements to experiences with examples. Tell me examples about this from your own experience. And he is aiming at fundamental philosophical principles that underlie the statement. He does so. He developed his Socratic method, what he called recursive abstraction. That it is, we start with the concrete statement, with a concrete experience, and then we, from this step by step, we make progress from this concrete statement to the abstract fundamental philosophical principle. And experiencing and the principle is important. So it's not just, oh, that's the principle, all right. No, you must be able to link the philosophical principle to your own experiences and your own way of thinking. So in this sense, experience is basic to Nelson's practice. We had the classical Socrates, we had Nelson, Leonard Nelson, and now we go to Edmund Husserl. Now the man at the bench is Husserl. He worked in the same times at Nelson, also in Germany. They knew each other. They didn't like each other. They didn't like each other's philosophies. Philosophy, also with Husserl, philosophy is philosophizing, but not a dialogical relationship, but self-perception. What happens at this bench is curious from in the eyes of philosophical practitioners. So we are always looking for dialogue, and Husserl was not. Excuse me. Nancy starts telling a story. So not Husserl starts the philosophizing, but Nancy starts telling her story. But now, to Husserl, what this situation, this situation in the park at the bench, and also the story Nancy tells, they seem to be real. We think they are real. Normally we do, that where we are, what we see, what we hear, what we perceive and experience is real. But Husserl says that's just what we think that is real. We learned it. It's our daily view, our daily opinions. It's not really what this situation is and what Nancy is and what her story is. So he said we must sweep away all this, what we think the situation is and the story is. We have to clean our mind. So that is, there's no conversation anymore. Nancy has told her story, and now Husserl is busy with his self-reflection, and he is perceiving himself. First of all, he cleans his mind. Oh no these thoughts about this park, this bench, this woman, this story. He says, when I have cleansed my mind, now this bench, this park, this Nancy, this story are just phenomena of my perception, of my experience. I don't know how they really are. I only know them, I only perceive them. They are only present to me as perceptions and experiences, as phenomena of my mind, of my consciousness, of my perception, of my experience. Now we should think that with this free mind, Husserl would start to talk with the woman. No, he doesn't do that. He concentrates, he focuses on these phenomena of his mind. And he asks, what is this phenomena? For instance, there are many phenomena now, right here. So he takes one. For instance, this phenomenon, mild autism in Nancy's story. And he takes this phenomena and asks himself, what is what is autism, and what kinds of autism are there? And then he thinks, and he have examples. He reminds him to all kinds of examples, and then he says, oh, in this example, he has 5 examples, for instance, of what is called autism, and then he thinks, no, these are accidental properties, not essential properties. And then he takes the second example in his mind and says, okay, these are the essential, these are the essential. And so he does do it with every example. And at the end, he said, now get rid of those all accidental properties, and now I have the essential properties of autism. Now I know what is autism, without any interaction with Nancy. Fortunately to us, Nancy is still on the bench. She did not leave. Nancy is just a phenomenon in Husserl's perception. And what Husserl is doing is uncover the pure phenomenon and the pure I, the pure ego. At the end, I said, hey, how is it possible that I am able to see the essential properties of autism? This is possible because my ego is not just the ego that is part of the world. No, there is also this ego that is pure, free from those concrete perceptions and thoughts and habits, etc. He could have tried, we could say, from the perspective of Socrates and Nelson, he could have tried to have Nancy do it by herself. That could be possible, that he tried, that he supported Nancy in doing such self-perception, such self-reflection. But Husserl did not do it. With Husserl, philosophy is about describing generally shared properties of the phenomenon, and in particular the phenomenon I, ego, self, subject. One of the few who criticized this position, this attitude of Husserl's was Merleau-Ponty. He said, yeah, why should you focus on this phenomenon of autism? There is something happening between us, between Nancy and me. Marcel Merleau-Ponty would say, when I felt some sadness. Her question at the end of her story, that was a question of sadness. And she was sad, and I felt the sadness. But this sadness I felt was not in me, it was between us. My sadness happened because of Nancy's sadness, and because she told me, she expresses her sadness. So this was a very important correction, so to say, by Merleau-Ponty. And this correction of Merleau-Ponty brings us to Husserl. Yes, by the way, Husserl is not Husserl's philosophy is not dialogical, it's a monologue with yourself. In short, Husserl in Socrates' shoes, our perception of Nancy is biased, like her perception of the situation at home. To me, the philosopher, Nancy is how she appears to me. She is my perception and experience. What I do is clear my perception from the biased thoughts. the pure I, being present by myself. This realizing the pure I, realizing being present by myself. And then he is focusing on one of the phenomena in this field of phenomena. And he's trying to describe the essence of this phenomenon. Well, let's go to Levinas. There's a change at the stage. Husserl leaves the stage and Levinas is coming in on the bench. For Levinas, philosophy is again a dialogical relationship, not a monologue, but a dialogue. And more of that, it is interaction. It's a relationship. And it is action. It is acting. It's a performance. It starts, the situation starts with Nancy, who expresses her sadness about the situation at home. Levinas focuses on or is sensitive to the experiential event that is happening, the emotional aspects of the situation. And he must, on this picture, they don't look at each other, but Levinas would be looking for her eyes. He wants to see her eyes and their expressions in her face, and in her words, in her presence, in her face, in her eyes, in her mouth. She expresses sadness about the situation at home. And Levinas is being overwhelmed by Nancy being sad. And he takes all responsibility for it. That's his typical way of doing philosophy. He said, before thinking, before philosophizing, there is already something happening. This relationship is happening. This Nancy's suffering is happening. And this suffering, Nancy's suffering, is my suffering. I'm overwhelmed by her being sad. We know this, we call this empathy, but empathy is very weak in comparison to what Levinas means. It's really, so think about when you're looking at a movie, or even then looking at a movie, but when you are with someone and that the other person is so sad, for instance, or angry, or have much pain, and the other person expresses this, and you feel it. You feel it in your body. There is something in your body that is reacting to it, and that is what Levinas means. That I am overwhelmed. I'm being overwhelmed by the other's suffering. In this case, by Nancy being sad. And then he says, now Nancy's sadness has become my sadness. It's almost the same. There is one sadness. There's Nancy being sad and me being sad. And it's not that we are going to identify what is your sadness and what is my sadness. No, it's before such thoughts. It is that in this meeting, in this encounter, in this interaction, sadness happens. And now I, Levinas, can do nothing but being responsible for this sadness. I must react. I must answer. I must do something. And that's here begins philosophy for Levinas. Being responsible for this sadness that happens here. Now we are going to talk about what can we do about it. And here the philosophical part, the dialogical part starts. So philosophy is a dialogical relationship. The philosopher is occupied by the other's suffering, and he can't do anything but taking full responsibility for this suffering. Levinas' philosophy is about experiencing and taking all responsibility of the other's suffering. It's a totally new perspective, and it is as it has nothing to do with Socrates. But the situation is Socratic. There are two people meeting each other, and they are sharing something. Nancy starts sharing, and while Nancy starts sharing her experience, her sadness, Levinas cannot but taking part in her sadness. And when we want to talk about how can we change the situation in Nancy's house and Nancy's home with the son and her husband, it has this basic condition of that they share the sadness, and now they can talk about the solution, if there is anyone. Okay, in short, Levinas encountering Nancy. Levinas criticized Husserl's focus on his ego and focus on the logos, on the words. Levinas' focus on his encounter with Nancy. He focused on the interaction, on what happened in this meeting, in this encounter. And then he looks at what happens, and that is the overwhelming experience of Nancy's experience, her sadness. And then he cannot but take all responsibility for her sadness. So far, Levinas. Now we have the fifth, we had Socrates, we had Leonard Nelson, we had Edmund Husserl, we had Emmanuel Levinas, and now we have Ludwig Wittgenstein. For those who know something about Wittgenstein, this is the later Wittgenstein, or the second Wittgenstein. For in Wittgenstein's work, we do not find descriptions of encounters, of meetings, of dialogues that really happened. We only find many dialogues, very short ones, but they are virtual dialogues. He is he makes them up. He fantasizes them. So now he is a real Socrates, that is, he is in a real situation with Nancy. We know that as a person, Wittgenstein did bother a lot about the lives of his friends and his students. So it's not an unreal, really it is not an unreal situation in Wittgenstein's life. So he talks with Nancy. And again, he doesn't take the initiative. Nancy takes the initiative. She starts to tell about her son and her husband, the situation at home. Wittgenstein is, we know from his letters and his remarks and stories from his friends and the people who know him, that he was engaged in the others' lives, but as a philosopher, he had a specific focus. So not everything is philosophy. Philosophy is a particular kind of thinking and investigating. So there is a normal human relationship between Nancy and Wittgenstein, but she tells a story. But then, as a philosopher, he listens, and he hears some particular words. He suspects that Nancy uses the word mild autism in a strange way. To him, it is a kind of metaphysical disruption of an experience. Nancy told her story. He told what his son PDDS, her man, that they had a quarrel, that they became aggressive, etc. And suddenly there comes this non-experiential word, autism, and then he thinks, Wittgenstein thinks, what about this word that is not an experiential word? It doesn't belong to our normal language. So he asks her, how is the word autism used here? So he asks her, tell me more about this situation. So there is a dialogue, a real dialogue. He asks Nancy about, tell me more about the situation with your son and with your man, and the situation with your husband, between them. And then she uses the word autism, as well as the word PDD-NOS, but we focus on autism. And then she said, yeah, how do you use this word autism here in this situation at home? And then it turns out to be a label. She is labeling her husband. So that is a rather everyday use of the word autism. We all of us use, being not psychiatrists, we use the word autism. And then when we use it, we are labeling. But both of them, neither Nancy nor Wittgenstein wants to label their husband, and so they are going to look for another word. So they are looking for other words to describe what her husband is doing. So we now get a description of her husband's behavior in so to say in normal everyday words. And what happens is now this behavior is more concrete, more detailed in our picture of the situation at home. And that is and we can say our experience is becoming richer. It's not a knot. It's not a knot in the concept of autism, but now it is fluid. It is there is more experience. So Nancy tells recollections of situations with her husband where she used the word mild autism. So philosophy with Wittgenstein, with the later Wittgenstein, is about using commonly understandable words, particularly in understanding metaphysical phenomena. The use of the word autism, we can we can consider it a metaphysical phenomena. When using autism, you think you are catching the essence of this behavior of her husband, but it is just an idea that you have the essence, that you know the essence. That is the metaphysical use of autism. And now, instead of our attention focused on this concept of autism, we have a more detailed picture of our experience, of Nancy's experience with her husband. That's what happened. And at the end, we can ask, do we agree that you have now told their behavior, the son's behavior and the man's husband's behavior, in words that everyone understands? In Wittgenstein's words, we can say that there was an homeless word. Autism was a homeless word, and in their investigation of investigation of Nancy's experiences with her husband, with the situations with her husband, they brought this homeless word autism back home in the situation of everyday language and everyday interactions, everyday life. Again, with Wittgenstein, philosophy is a dialogue. So Husserl was the only one whose philosophy is a monologue. The other philosophers in this hour were having dialogues with other people. In short, Wittgenstein is looking for homeless concepts in Nancy's story. He is together with Nancy. They are bringing back those words back home. They do that by describing examples of this concept, autism, in Nancy's recollections of situations with her husband. That was it. So we have on the bench, we saw the classic Socrates, we saw Leonard Nelson, we saw Edmund Husserl, we saw Emmanuel Levinas and Ludwig Wittgenstein, and now we are at the end. Hopefully, we have now a picture of a contemporary Socrates. That is, the classical character, philosophical character Socrates, changed by new contemporary philosophies. What is important? Socratic philosophy is embedded in daily life. It does not happen in specialized rooms, in specialized settings like psychotherapeutic sessions. No, everyday life is happening, and while life is happening, also philosophy might happen. And philosophy is just a moment. You understand that I don't believe in philosophy as a way of life. Philosophy is just a moment in life. And it is Nancy's narrative. Yeah? With Husserl, it was Husserl's narrative. But in Socratic encounters, it's Nancy's narrative. The conversation is in colloquial language. So there is it's not with Socrates, not with Wittgenstein. There is a specialized philosophical language. Socrates and Wittgenstein speak everyday language, their mother's tongue, so to say. There's not something like a philosophical jargon. Thanks to Levinas, Socrates is not just listening to concepts, but now Socrates is experiencing Nancy's experience. And at the park bench, Socrates takes full responsibility for her experience. And then, having done this, Socrates focuses on truth claims in Nancy's narrative. Socrates asks Nancy to bring her concepts back home in her situations. And an expression I like to use in this context is, what is Socrates doing? The contemporary Socrates, what is he doing? He helps Nancy exploring her landscape of experiences. And to do that, he himself must try to enter Nancy's landscape of experiences. So a big part of the conversation is this Socrates trying to enter Nancy's landscape of experiences. And then what the points that we see here happen. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Leon.
Hello.
I really enjoyed all these colleagues in the park.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Can I ask you something, Leon?
Yes, Aura.
Yeah, you said that the end you focus on the truth of Nancy's statements, Nancy claims in the story. Can you elaborate about this? What do you mean by that?
I didn't hear the last question.
In the last list, you said the contemporary Socrates talks with Nancy, focus on the truth of in Nancy claims.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit what you mean by that?
Yes. You can imagine a big part of the conversation is actually not philosophical. The big part of the conversation is about Nancy telling her experiences, and to Wittgenstein and to the classical Socrates, philosophy comes into the light when there is something happening in the words of the interlocutor, of the other person, or one of the participants, in this case Nancy. So in conversation with Wittgenstein, when she says her husband has a mild autism, then Wittgenstein thinks, oh, now philosophy is needed. What is this? What is this word, autism? It is a concept. What is the concept doing? What is the concept doing with Nancy's experience? What is concept doing with Nancy's thinking? The concept of autism might cause a kind of a thinking knot, so to say, in Nancy's attention and in Nancy's thinking. She thinks she knows what her husband is, how her husband is, because he uses this concept of autism. And Wittgenstein thinks, oh, we ask, is that so? Do you know now what your husband really is, what his behavior is? He thinks it's not, because your attention is going away from your husband. Your attention is now in this abstract concept. Let us go back to your husband. Look at your husband. Describe what he is doing. At that moment that you call him autist, describe what he is doing in everyday language.
Yeah,
So
understand.
autism, the concept of autism is a truth claim. The claim to know what her husband is.
It's what I would say that her claim to know is unjustified because she's thinking in abstract concepts instead of looking into concrete reality. That's what
Mhm.
you're suggesting. So her claim to knowledge is false, rather than going to truth. He's challenging her belief that she knows by using the term autistic. She catch the situation, which is not.
Yeah,
That's what you're saying.
yeah.
Okay.
Wittgenstein questions the truth claim.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
but you, I mean, what it implies for your work, for what you are.
yes. I follow Wittgenstein in this. Yeah,
No,
but
so I would also do the same thing, similar thing in such a case.
okay, I'm
Yeah,
happy.
no, I'm inspired by another by
Of course.
Austin also does the same thing, but of course the truth, I don't know. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Wittgenstein himself said he was not the only one who thought in this way. There are others. So it's not just Wittgenstein who
No,
thought.
but I what about?
It's just me who think it.
No, I don't. No, it's not that the point. My point is that it's not the question that you now attain the truth, but
Mhm.
that
I
you
know.
get liberated from the belief that
Yes,
got the truth through the concept. That's
yes,
what.
yes. We agree. Thank you.
All right, if I may make a comment.
Hello, Alexander.
Yeah, hello, Leon. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much. Fascinating presentation, very informative. And actually, I really wish that there were more attempts to do this sort of side-by-side comparison of maybe contemporary ways of doing practical philosophy in different forms, so that could really help people navigate this kind of wide space. Yeah, I mean, so your presentation is extremely helpful for that. So in terms of my question, I'd be interested to hear what you think about the potential problems of just reapplying the classic Socratic approach to practical philosophy without any modification to contemporary settings. So, I mean, each of these methods, of course, of doing philosophy would have some kind of benefits, yeah, and some sort of blind spots. So if you just take what Socrates was doing back in the Athens and try to do exactly the same thing in the contemporary world, what could be the problematic aspects of that, as well as maybe the gains as compared to other methods of doing practical philosophy?
Yes. What I'm doing, I think we all should do it. That is, the problem about the professional philosophical quality of what we are doing as philosophical practitioners. That is to be transparent about our relation of this easy looking way of philosophizing what we do, easy looking, how it relates to the history of philosophy. And when you do that, how do you handle the history of philosophy? And of course, you cannot handle all philosophy. You have there are some philosophers who inspired you. So these five philosophers inspired me. There are more, but I cannot I cannot bring them on the stage, all of them. So so I started with Deleuze Guattari. I think it's very postmodern, so to say. So in our time, that we do not believe that some philosopher. I hope none of us does believe that there are great philosophers in history that knew the truth. So that is the concept of the conceptual persona, of the character, is that also Plato created his own philosophy. That was not objective, that was not truth. He created his own philosophy, and he made his philosophy out of the historical figure of Socrates. So I make my philosophy out of my examples in the history of philosophy. And yes, of course, when you are old, like I am, then you have read a lot, maybe many philosophers, and then you are inspired by a lot of philosophers. But what is important is that you just not read them, but that you make your own Socrates, so to say. If Socrates is your character, of course. Thomas of Aquino also can be it's not mine, but also can be your character, and then you're acting in a totally different way as a philosophical practitioner. Is that an answer?
So basically, what you're saying that in your practice here, you're not trying to like replicate Socrates, but you're just showing how you've been inspired by him. But basically, my question was more about, okay, if you don't do what you do, yeah, because you were very transparent about what it is that, what you're trying to do and what has inspired you. But rather, somebody says, okay, what Socrates was doing is just, good enough. I don't need to add anything. I don't need to modify anything. Let's just try to replicate what we know he was doing based on Plato's dialogues, and just try to do exactly the same thing, word by almost like word by word. Or if it doesn't have to be Socrates, it can be any other philosopher, yeah. So we just say, okay, that was a clever guy, he knew what he was doing, yeah. Let's just try to do exactly the same thing now in the contemporary world to try to help, people who come to us for philosophical practice. What may be some kind of problems with this type of non-flexible attitude from what you from your position?
What kind of it?
A non-flexible attitude, or rather something that's basically without adjusting it to what we know about the world these days.
Yes. The very difficult thing is that you only can be a good philosophical practitioner when you are your own. When you are yourself, so to say. So replicating Socrates or replicating Nelson or replicating Oscar Brunefier, that's not possible. Then you are not a real person who is philosophizing with another real person. Then you are a model, so to say. Then you are a robot or something that is doing some prefabricated actions, like questioning this, questioning that, and etc. No, that's the difficult. That's why I don't believe in about the education of philosophical practitioners. So what we have the last 10 years, that is these short courses. People who don't have an academic, professional philosophical education, which takes years and years and goes on when you have your diploma. Becoming a philosopher always goes on. When they don't have that, they are not able to become a philosopher. And that to become a philosopher is to become a philosopher like Alexandra, a philosopher like Kirill, a philosopher like Leon. When you meet Alexandra, I hope, as a philosopher, you meet Alexandra, and not some kind of robot, not kind of technical procedure or so. So we need examples. We must learn from our examples in history, but you have to eat them so that they become yourself.
Yeah, can I add that?
Yeah, or
from your example, you took Socrates, then you took several contemporary philosophers, who didn't agree with Socrates as he did it, and didn't agree with each other. And through this dialogue, through in the history of philosophy, aware of the difficulties with Socrates himself, aware of the difficulties of Wittgenstein, of Husserl, etc., you build up, you form your own way of doing
Yes.
philosophy. And so you pass the process. You cannot just go back to Socrates, who lived 2,000 years ago, ignore what was being said about him, what was being challenged about him, and just be Socrates. This is not philosophy.
No.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
You're welcome.
now you certainly have answered the question. Thank you.
Okay.
The first question, is grounding ontic, ethical, existential, or semantic?
Is what is
Grounding.
grounding? So grounding your, like Nelson did, like Husserl did, grounding your philosophy. Yeah. I cannot deny that it's philosophy, because many philosophers did do it. But I think in philosophy, as I see it and as I do it, grounding is the attempt to find a conceptual and theoretical reason, so to say, or ground for everything else you are doing, also as the philosopher. And I think you always are developing concepts and theories. That's to say, from a Socratic point of view, you have always then to question these these grounding concepts and theories. So from a Socratic point of view, it's no way to try to formulate a ground of philosophy, of thinking, of experience, etc.
And the second question from Gargi Jane, is reality a matter of semantic projection or illusion?
Again, please.
Is reality a matter of semantic projection or illusion?
Yes. Being a disciple of, so to say, being inspired, I must say, by Wittgenstein, but the later Wittgenstein would say, I cannot say anything about it. When I try to say about it as a philosopher, I claim truth about those statements I make. I cannot do that. As a philosopher, I cannot say about it. Look in the library and you will find philosophers who have answers, but I do not have it.
In the internet, not in the library.
Yeah. Okay.
And Wahid Reza would like to ask a question.
First of all, thank you for the presentation that you had. You mentioned something about philosophy as a way of life and as moments. I want to know more about these two way of thinking.
Yeah. It's very popular nowadays to say that philosophy is a way of living, a way of life. And what you see in this context, then there's a revival of Hellenistic philosophy, a revival of Western copies of Buddhism, etc., and Taoism, and then philosophy knows what it is to live good. They knows what is good living. They know what is good life. And I think then that's how can you say that? How do we know that? Who am I as a philosopher that I know what is in general, a good life. I have some ideas what I myself consider a good life, and in my small circle of my family and friends, I think I can make comments on how they live. But as a philosopher, I think I do not know what is good life. Those philosophers who do that, I consider them. Someone must put down his microphone. Okay. In my eyes, those philosophers who say that they know what is good life, they are like prophets. In the Bible, they are the new priests. And I think, as a philosopher, I cannot ground it, so to say.
I have a question.
Okay. Please, you're welcome.
Hello,
You presented several models of philosophizing. If in a given counseling session, how do you pick your particular model that may be most appropriate for the given counseling situation?
In a counseling situation, I don't have models in my mind. It's not. I know that, for instance, Gert Achenbach. I've spoken to him more than once, and then once he told me that in a conversation, it can happen that the other person says something, and then he said, "Oh, I don't know anything about it. For instance, fear, but I have read Kierkegaard, and Kierkegaard knows what fear is, and I've read him, and now I can become Kierkegaard for a moment. Then, so I can help. I can understand this other person. I don't have that. My attention is with this other person, with what Nancy tells me, what happens between us in the conversation, and then I have no models or standard questions or other things in my mind. I just have my attitude at the beginning is that I am all yours. I'm all yours. And then and that is, of course, I react from experience. Of course, Levinas is there present in me, but not as Levinas, not in the form of his texts. And I will not say to I will not bring Levinas into the conversation, but because Levinas in the course of years. What Levinas's point, so to say, has become my point. So I don't have to think about it. That empathy is so important in the relationship, in the conversation, in the counseling. That is natural. It is there. It happens, so to say. So I don't have models, and I don't apply models.
Thank you. Thank you very much for
maybe you can recognize them. When you see me working, you can recognize them. But that is something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we almost reached the time limit, and the next lecture will start in less than 10 minutes, so we have to stop. I hope it is possible to contact Leon personally, for example, by email, if you still have questions.
Yes, sure.
Thank you very much, Leon, for your lecture, and thank you, dear participants, for your questions and for your interest.
Thank you, all of you. And some of you, see you again.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.